Rob Kearney announcing today that he is stepping away from Leinster and from Ireland. I say stepping away because it does seem as though his career isn't done yet. A lot of speculation that he may move to Australia for the next few months to link up with the Western Force. And I'll run through it again. His hit list of honours is second to none. He is the most decorated player in Irish rugby history. 4 Six Nations, 2 Grand Slams, 4 European Cups, just the 6 Pro 14s, a couple of Lions tours, and the European Player of the Year in 2012. He did all right.
He did okay, didn't he? Yeah, I think if you look back, you know, a lot of Ireland and Leinster's success culminated with him and a group of other players coming through, and their timing could not have been better. But what they added, and particularly what he added, kind of a steeliness and a comfort and a confidence. And to stay in that position, you know, make it his own for the best part of 15 years is a testament to him as a pro, but as a really exceptional athlete that I don't always think got the accolades that he deserved. He was involved in every big day Ireland have had pretty much for the last 15 years. And that's not, you know, your list of accolades, that's not to mention the series win in Australia, the first in 40 years. The double win against the All Blacks, one of which he was man of the match when, you know, when it was put to him by Joe Schmidt that I need a big game from you. Talk about delivering on cue. He has been a remarkable servant for Leinster and for Ireland. And you get the sense that I don't think we'll have a full appreciation for him until we have a bit of time without him. I think we're even seeing now some of the aspects of his play that he's renowned for. You know, Leinster are probably struggling in that department. So it's a really brilliant rugby career that hopefully has, you know, one more twist to it if he does head down to Australia. And why wouldn't you go down to top up that already delightful permatan that he seems to have?
I was reading a report earlier on in the Examiner from 2005, his debut for Leinster, a pre-season friendly against Parma when he scored a hat-trick. It was Robert Kearney back then. And you talk about timing, that was Michael Cheika's first game in charge of Leinster. That steeliness, when you describe Kearney, when he arrived into that dressing room as a young man, as a teenager, did you have any sense of that steeliness and that talent that was there?
Well, he came with a big reputation from schools rugby with Clongowes. I have a feeling he might have even played 13 in his final year. It was just a case of trying to get one of your best players the ball as often as you possibly can. And so, you know, there's 1 or 2 players every year that come out of school that make it into the academy that senior players, more established players would be aware of or would have heard, you know, reputationally to keep an eye on. But you have to earn that immediately. It's one thing being a schoolboy, great, but then you've got to show it at training every day. You've got to show it in the games when you are given that opportunity, usually through A games first, and then your slow introduction into the main senior team. So, you know, he ticked all of those boxes very quickly. He had a confidence about him, you know, that bordered on that arrogance, which is exactly what you need, but on the healthy side of things, where he backed his ability. He felt as though he wasn't out of place even as an 18 or 19-year-old, and that he was there, you know, physically to be able to live with the big boys. So, you know, he had all the attributes to stay in the game for a long time, which he's subsequently shown. But it takes a particular individual to come out of school and have the ability to translate schoolboy rugby into senior rugby, which are worlds apart.
Those attributes that you talk about on the pitch in terms of his ability under the high ball, the brilliance with his left boot, and you talk about appreciation, it is now that he's gone and he's been sort of moving away from it over the past 6 months to a year that there is, I think, a full appreciation of it now, because you're watching Leinster last Saturday and you're watching Jordan Larmour, and if he doesn't collect the high ball straight away, you're thinking, well, we've become used to this. We've had 15 years of Rob Kearney getting that and us not fully appreciating what a talent it was.
Yeah, I'm almost surprised, you know, that the cameras didn't pan to Rob Kearney every time that Jordan Larmour dropped a high ball a la Raj and Johnny, you know, because there's a real sense of that. And it feels as though they've come full circle where people have forgotten what Jordan is capable of in attack and now are focusing on, some of his weaknesses. And people got a bit hung up on what Rob Kearney perhaps didn't offer to the same degree in attack as he did in defence. That said, I don't know too many times that Rob Kearney on counter-attack, even if he didn't choose the right option coming back, that he didn't break the first tackle. He'd phenomenal strength and ability to fight in contact, didn't lose the ball very often. And albeit he didn't, have, incredible feet or, didn't have electric pace, he still was a very proficient counter-attacker in the first 10, 12 years. Probably the last few years, not quite as effective. But his game was built on a stability, and as a result, Leinster and Ireland's success has been built on a stability. And I don't think you can underestimate that as well, that the confidence as teammates, knowing that, the last man standing behind you is someone that has that confidence, that has that understanding of spatial awareness, of covering the backfield, of being a very good tackler, and then on top of being a good, catch kicker of the ball that we I always will associate with him. He was a lot more than that. And you don't get into Lions teams, you don't stay in the international game for being a one or a two trick pony. You have to have multifacets to your game. And he definitely had that. And I kind of feel as though the general public didn't always have a full appreciation for that with him.
Yeah, it's a real interesting point. It reminds me of John Giles talking about goalkeepers, and when a team loses faith in a goalkeeper, how it just runs its way through the 11 and everybody's that little bit more nervous. That with Rob Kearney, you had this full trust that when that ball went in deep, you knew he'd collect it, you knew he'd do the right thing, and suddenly you can get yourself into position because you know exactly what's going to happen pretty much all the time.
Yeah, it's like the goalkeeper coming out and catching corners rather than punching them, right? There's an air of confidence that comes with that. You just had no doubt. It was a collector's item for him to drop one in a game, to not be the guy, soaring up higher. And so rarely, he's not a small man. He's maybe 6 foot, maybe a fraction over. But it's the timing of his jumps, getting up to that maximum apex position of catching the ball. At his maximum height. That is an art form, and I think with Jordan Larmour we're seeing that he's a coming player in that regard, but he's still got his timing off. Rob got it from a very young age. Now, he did have a great tutor in Gervin Dempsey of that side of the game, understanding field position, grass cover, collecting high ball, but I think he brought it on to an altogether different level than Gervin. And now it's that's the standard bearer by which we expect, but you'll be surprised in the next 5 years. I don't know we'll have too many players who will get back to that standard. Maybe even the next 10, 15 years, that will be something that we'll look back and go, wow, that really was a phenomenal skill set that many have struggled to climb to that standard.
Yeah, when we're having those debates about Ireland's greatest ever 15, we never need to leave much time at the end because the conversation around fullback is going to be a pretty short one. It's going to be Rob Kearney, and you can sort of move on quite quickly. Just on his role in that golden generation then, and the famous story of down in Enfield and his talk with the Munster players and what we wanted. Give a side of maybe Rob Kearney that people hadn't seen either before or maybe since, in his influence on the group. Like, that was a team with a lot of big personalities, a lot of big character. Yeah. What was his role within that dressing room?
Well, I have to say, I was shocked when he said it, when he stuck his head above the parapet and he came out with it. And I thought it was an incredibly brave thing to do for a guy that hadn't proven himself in front of all of those Munster players. For him to come out and show that level of honesty. I'm sure there was some people that were a bit disgruntled by it, but it was right, the timing of it. He had just broken into the national team. He'd a handful of caps, I think, or had he even? Yeah, he maybe had a couple of caps, but he was about to become Ireland's full-time fullback in the following Six Nations. And I just thought, for a young guy willing to put his neck on the line, it just felt like a courageous thing to do, where something needed to be said, which would be to the betterment of the team overall, but yet in the short term, he might get it in the neck a little bit. And I have to say, I've always liked Rob. I'm obviously good friends with him. I always liked him from a young age. He He was able to fit in with older players from straight out of school. He didn't make a fool of himself. He wasn't immature. He was quite mature for his age. So for him to come out as a 20-year-old and say that, I thought was an incredibly mature thing to do. And one that absolutely stood to him, because I'm sure he got respect, even though players mightn't have told him immediately. I'm sure they respect him because he made people question whether the commitment to Ireland was the same as Munster. And I'm not saying it was or it wasn't, but it made people think about it and reinforced how important playing international rugby was for those players.
I mentioned 4 European Cups. He didn't play in the 2011 final, but he bounced back the next year incredibly, ends up as European Player of the Year. And in the knockout stages, from the quarter-final win against Cardiff, where he gets a couple of tries, the performance and the drop against Claremont, to the final against Ulster. Was that Kearney for you as a Leinster teammate, him at his peak? Big games,
yeah, well, I
big
think
player?
coming back from the injury, season that he'd had a very serious knee injury, missed the whole Heineken Cup, and definitely we're not giving him the 4 Heineken Cups. We're only giving him 3 because we're on level peggings on that. I'm just holding on to him by fingernails in that regard. But he, people don't have an appreciation when there was talk of whether he'd come back from that knee injury. I remember he had to have puncture holes put into his patella, as far as I know. And the mental fortitude to be able to not only come back from something that could have been a career-threatening injury, but then to come back and produce your best form is quite something. And delivering in big games, big moments, the drop goal against Claremont in the semi-final, and that jog back to his position thereafter, which he's had the mickey taken out of him for many years. And then the try that he scored too, right after half-time, getting us back in the game. He's been a big game player, and he's almost at his best when people start questioning him. And I think that's a real testament of the sort of personality that we're talking about, is that if you're able to dig deep for another 5 or 10% when there's question marks around you rather than crumble, I think they're the guys you want to be on the hard track, but they're the guys you want to be in the trenches with as well.
If Rob Kearney ends up listening to this, he'll go, geez, lads, I'm not dead. I'm not done yet. I've stepped away from Leinster and Ireland, and tributes are brilliant, but he still, it seems, is going to continue. All the speculation today seems to be that he's going to go to Australia. He's going to go to Western Force and may spend the next 6 months or so there. It certainly sounds like a very appealing move.
Yeah, and obviously a good reputation then in Australia. Like I mentioned, that series win, he was very impressive in those couple of games that he played in that series win. What's not to like about Perth? Great Irish contingent down there, expats down there. It's a great part of the world, and playing fast, free-flowing rugby. And I get the sense, we've had conversations, I'm sure he's taken advice from all quarters, but if you think as though you've got a little bit left in the tank, I would encourage you to play on. And I think he feels as though there's still one more good season, or certainly a season, if it ends up being down in the Force, still left in the tank. He's in phenomenal condition at the moment, and you can't put it's an intangible bringing someone of that level of experience and embedding them into a young system, a la Brad Thorne or any of our overseas players, Nathan Hines, these guys. You plug them into your system. It's what the other players that are training with them every day, the wealth of knowledge that they soak up from them, is actually the real win. And that's why Western Force, I'm sure, are interested in bringing him down there. Obviously, from the player perspective, but his IQ and his IP is right up there with the best of them.